Hello, and welcome to Capital Compass. We are the official podcast of the New York State Catholic Conference. I'm your host, Gillian. Today, in episode 33, I'll be talking with Sister Mary DePaul from the Dominican Sisters of Hawthorne about respecting life and end-of-life care. Each year in October, the Catholic Church in the United States celebrates Respect Life Month. As Catholics, we are called to cherish, defend, and protect those who are most vulnerable, from the beginning to the end of their lives, and at every point in between. Joining us on the podcast today is Sister Mary DePaul from the Dominican Sisters of Hawthorne to discuss their ministry's work nursing those with incurable cancer at the end of their lives. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Can you tell our listeners a little background about your order?
Well, we were founded at the turn of the last century. Our foundress was Rose Hawthorne. She was the daughter of Nathaniel Hawthorne, a convert to Catholicism. She lived, you would say, probably a privileged life at the time, was well educated, moved in circles that had social impact. And she and her husband lost a child, and they had some difficulties through their marriage, but they found great solace in the doctrines of the church and understanding the communion of saints and being a part of something much greater than themselves. And they converted through the Paul's Fathers, actually, and became Catholics in 1891. Rose and George still had some difficulties. They gave a lot of energy to the church, trying to do charitable works and education programs and all, but they did wind up separating. And Rose always said that she wanted to do something very useful to give back to God, all that he had given to her. So she found out that the cancerous poor in New York City really suffered their disease without any care at all. Many ended up in almshouses of the day, which were sort of the refuge of where people that had no place else to go ended up, and had very poor medical care and attention. Sometimes even patients taking care of patients in order to survive, and hoping that somebody would be standing upright when their turn came when they were bedbound. So she thought this was a terrible thing. And although she knew she couldn't do a whole lot, she went down to the Lower East Side and she rented rooms in a tenement and began taking in patients that were really evicted from their apartments and things like that and couldn't survive on their own. And that was how the work of the community began. And then through a Dominican father, Father Tente, who came down to see her work, actually to visit a parishioner from St. Vincent Ferrer Parish, when he realized what they were doing, he said, this work needs more religious grace and help and support. And he encouraged them to become Dominican tertiaries and continue the work. And that's how that was the seed of the start.
Can you tell our listeners a bit about what you do?
Well, we have a facility here in New York, which is our mother house, and was opened in 1901. And it stemmed from our first building, which was down on the Lower East Side. And what we do is we take in individuals that have exhausted their means to sustain their care at their end of life, and they all have cancer diagnosis. That was what we were founded for. There's still a good need of people in that realm. So sometimes we get people that don't have status here as citizens. Sometimes we get people just from impoverished communities. Sometimes we even get people from middle class set of life that, didn't have proper savings for long-term care and things like that, and really need the assistance at the end of their life. Sometimes have a spouse that they're worried about what's going to happen to them if everything's drained. And so we take people that are in financial need and both have need good palliative care. Sometimes they're here longer than people would expect, but but they just need good palliative end-of-life care.
With October being Respect Life Month, and in this case, meaning respect in dying, there are people that say Western medicine doesn't necessarily provide compassionate death. There are a lot of artificial means of keeping people alive. How does this compare to kind of like what you guys offer? One of the big things that we do or that we've done on the podcast is really stress the importance of like palliative care.
Yes, it's true. We have to deal with our fact that we're not going to be here forever. And I think sometimes in our culture, unfortunately, people just get wrapped in a cycle of what to do next. And maybe they don't think of the what happens at the end of life sometimes. And I think that they might see it and touch on it, but they don't always understand that there's more than the here and now, I think, and you have focusing on that is hard for many people, I think. So when when they go into healthcare, and especially as they get older and they get a diagnosis of something that's going to end up being chronic, so to speak, it's managed in the beginning, and they seem to be able to get by with some little losses. But as the losses get greater, they have to deal with the fact that they're not going to be able to keep going on. And I think sometimes the healthcare industry hasn't been able to help them with that, to help them see in a compassionate way, rather than you can see from both ends. You can see it like, well, we're not going to get better from this, and we're not going to do much, which isn't a way to approach it either. But the other approach that, oh, we'll do this for you and let's keep you in the system, isn't always helpful either. It's being able to see the trajectory of the disease, and understand what the consequences are of each treatment option that you take. And sometimes I think people don't get the right guidance in that, or don't have the right clinicians that can do that. So that's a very important factor, I think, in our Western medicine that we have to address.
No, one of my big questions on researching you guys was how have patients found you guys? I'm an upstater, so I'm not as familiar with things as downstate, but I'm just very curious and kind of hope our listeners can hear.
We've been here since 1901, so we have a reputation in the community, although not everybody knows about us. We really depend on the social workers in the hospitals to direct the right patients to us. Unfortunately, sometimes we're small, so we can only take so many. So sometimes we have the thing where they apply, and then we just don't have a bed ready for somebody, because does depend on that turnover. But that's the majority. Sometimes it's because the family knows about us because they had a grandparent or a great grandparent that died here, and they might look us up that way. But the majority of them come through the social workers in the various hospitals, or people who even sometimes a priest might call us from a parish and say, we have this parishioner. We had a very interesting case that happened about a year ago, that this one parish, that a lot of volunteers in the parish were going in and taking care of this elderly woman who was alone as long as they could, and they did a wonderful job. And then when the point got where it really just became too difficult for them to manage her medical symptoms, they called us, and we were able to help. So those are the kinds of things that the kind of sources that we have. So we appreciate. We do depend on the community to direct us to the people that most need us.
I noticed one of the qualifications to be cared at your facilities is financial need. You don't accept private or government insurance.
Yes.
Catholic social teaching reminds us to care for the poor and the sick. How do you see this tying into Respect Life?
We're called as a community and one of the wealthiest nations in the world to really look after the poor and the vulnerable. And they're on our streets, and they're also across the ocean in other continents. In a small way, we do it here in this community. Sometimes we get people from Connecticut and New Jersey also, so we do a little bit interstate. But we hope that we help, even though it's a handful probably in the number that probably are out there that could use this kind of service. We hope that we help a significant group, that through the ones that we help, we inspire others also, maybe to do more, or even to be directed to even to the church and the message of salvation, that and it depended on the support of the church, and look at the church in a way that does look out for the most needy and the poorest in the community.
When we think of Respect Life, most people think of the beginning of life. Why is it so important for us to focus on the end of life too?
Well, they're hand in glove. They're two the most vulnerable groups in society. I mean, the elderly and the ill don't always have people to stand up and voice for them as the child in the womb. They're there. They're maybe more visible to us in many ways, which makes it more blatantly our responsibility to take care of them in some regards, because we can see it, and we know that as a person we're approaching that in our lives too. So I think that if we can't respect what we see suffering, how can we even understand what we don't see?
And I'm sure you've heard there's a growing push for physician-assisted suicide. I know this is a little more complex topic.
Oh, yeah.
I kind of, again, want to hit home with our listeners. Why should we be supporting palliative care and other means of medical care instead of such drastic choices?
Oh, I think people sometimes might even confuse, I guess you confuse the idea that, palliative care, we have a lot of options to help people be comfortable. We have medications, we've developed a lot of several modalities to help pain, whether they be on that's from the central nervous system or in just local systems. And we employ a lot of them here. Our goal is to help people to be as comfortable and as active as possible and as mindful as possible with the days they have left. And I think people don't always realize that, as you approach each loss and you find a way to cope and support, you can't judge what's going to happen way forward 2 years down the line or a year down the line when you have to meet each challenge as it's approaching. You have a community of people to help you and support you. That's the beauty of being able to move forward and accept your suffering, but also expect the support and the relief of suffering that is at your disposal. It's so interesting because, we have many patients, sometimes even our own sisters who, become ill and they have to accept the change. And you think to yourself, well, can I accept that I'm not going to be able to walk from my bed to the bathroom? And then you have people taking care of you and you find other outlets of enjoyment, that you go to an activity and you participate in a baking but we have our activities persons, they do crafts, and you have these people that can't even dress themselves or take care of themselves, but they can help mix the cookie batter, and they find enjoyment in the day doing little things. Even the community, there's one lady here that said to me one day, I said, do you miss being home? Because she made a reference to home, and she said, well, I do, but she said, but I have people here, and I don't want to be left at home alone. So I enjoy the things that are offered to me here. So from her home perspective, when people told her, oh, you're going to go into a facility that's going to take care of you, she resisted. But then when she got here, she was able to overcome that obstacle and then find enjoyment in what was offered. And then the next obstacle will come, and hopefully the support of the nursing community, the sisters and ancillary staff that we have will support her into the next phase. So I think people, they jump the gun and think of themselves as walking and doing the things that they do independently, and then they're thinking of being dependent and not realize that there's still opportunities to be a person and have value in each day and hour in that next realm. So unfortunately, I think too, the other thing is when I was growing up, we had a large extended family, and my grandfather lived with us. And I always remember my mother's aunts, they were all that generation of my grandfathers. And as each one got elderly, they went to my Aunt May's house. It was in a section of Philadelphia, and they each died in the house, and then their funerals started out with a viewing being laid out in the living room. And we had the family was there. And death was a natural part of life. And the process to get there was also, most of those aunts and uncles were in their 80s and 90s when they died, which was good longevity, which isn't always the case. But they had this acceptance of life in the family as being that the next thing to accept and have the support of the family. And I don't know that we have that in our extended families anymore, which is sort of sad. People work and don't seem to have that time for their generation before them.
Now, I do have a more personal question, because I love hearing about different vocation stories, and there are so many different choices in religious orders, and it's always good to promote vocations too, obviously. So, why did you choose the Hawthorne Dominicans out of all the other religious orders you might have been?
Well, I was attracted to religious life when I was in high school, and I knew about this community. Actually, I was thinking I belonged in a cloister, believe it or not. But anyway, I was visiting the Poor Clares in Langhorne, Pennsylvania. But there was a sister from our parish who happened to be in this community, still is. And the idea of taking care of the sick was very appealing to me. I think my dad's side of the family, we lost almost a whole generation to cancer. So growing up, there was multiple funerals, and multiple times people were often in the hospital with it wasn't the earliest time, of course, of chemo and radiation, but it was a time when we were still making a lot of mistakes in that treatment category with people. So, I saw one particular aunt on my dad's side that had suffered greatly in the process. And I remember her saying when I was 14, I had gone to visit her with my dad, and she asked my dad to send me outside, and I was outside the room, and she said, this suffering from cancer isn't, she didn't want me to see that, so she felt that something different should have been of her life at that end stage. And she did really suffer and not have the support of the medicine that was developed for palliative care at that time. So, and I found out about these sisters and actually went to visit when I was a sophomore in high school. And it was in our home in New York City. We were having the firemen's party. Every year, the firemen of New York City, they had the Anchor Club. They would come and put a big party on for patients. And so we're going around to these patients, and I'm now about 17 years old, and I'm walking around and I'm seeing these people smiling and singing and happy as they're dying of cancer, so to speak, and some not looking very healthy, of course, but happy, And so this contrast with what I saw with my aunt, and then seeing that was like, wow, there is a way to make people feel better at the end of life, particularly from cancer. So I think that was the life experience that drew me to the community.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day. I know you guys do a lot. How can our listeners learn more about your order or support your work?
Well, we always ask people to pray for vocations. We get the opportunity to be as visible in young circles as other communities do. So we always ask for prayers for vocations and any way they can promote Rose Hawthorne's cause. She's a servant of God, and we hope she'll be venerable soon. So we do have that if they want to write and become a guild member for promoting Rose Hawthorne's cause in their parishes. If they know young people, young women who have a vocation and possibly would like to take care of the sick, maybe they could come visit us. That would be wonderful. So that would be a big, big help.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to the Capital Compass podcast, and thank you so much to Sister Mary DePaul for coming on the show. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and a review. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and to catch the latest from the conference, you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at NYS Catholic Conf and on Facebook at NYS Catholic Conference. Thanks again, and God bless.